Hello and welcome to Series 1, Episode 2 of Commander Fodder. Our chosen fodder for this series is the Coldsnap Beyond the Grave deck. So obviously we're going to be basing this around Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper. If you haven't seen the introductory episode or episode 1 of this series, then definitely take a look at that because it makes more sense in terms of where this particular episode, where this particular series is going. And so today we're on the second episode, and my original plan was just basically to go through cards from the original deck and look at substitutions. But I thought the problem with that is of course you need some context as to where these substitutions might be coming from beyond me just pulling them out of binders. So what I've decided to do is this episode is going to be about card selection or possible sources of card selection from EDHRec and or other multiplayer products, more specifically the Commander products. And I felt that it was good to do it around this way, because then when I come to do the cards from the original deck from the Beyond the Grave, and I'm at that point substituting out before I even sort of put it into the Commander deck, I'm substituting out stuff from the Beyond the Grave deck that doesn't actually make sense in the theme of the deck. Maybe they were weak cards originally, or they were just not particularly in place in that deck. Maybe they were utility cards which are better served by a different utility card. They perform a good service to us in they are performing the service of a placeholder during the time while we're trying to decide what should go in our Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper deck. But I felt it made more sense if you sort of saw where those cards might be coming from outside of the fact I might be just pulling them out of binders. So that's why we're going to look at this whole thing of pre-existing decks, if you like, either decks that have been constructed through some sort of aggregation or commonality technique, or from existing Commander product. So just quickly, last week we were looking at the basic toolkit. We looked at some universal cards that would be useful in our toolkit, and we also looked at some on colour stuff, which obviously created a small amount of our deck already. And if you remember, the idea for the toolkits, or I think they were called starter kits, came from an article by Benny Smith. So what I want to do now is talk about a couple of things around Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper. So I thought what I'd do first of all is just show you what happens if you take Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper, and bearing in mind we're trying to keep this fairly good budget wise, but if you took Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper, fed it into the service EDHRec, and chose all the decks, there's an ability in there to choose decks which fit into certain categories. You'll find that there's maybe a tribal deck, there might be a percentage of the decks which considered to be on the more expensive side, or there might be some budget decks there, and there are ways in which you can select that particular focus and produce I suppose a standard or an aggregate deck built around this commander. Now, one of the problems with doing that, of course, you're very much at the mercy of the original decks that were submitted. So what I've tended to find is you can get different results, obviously based on different commanders, in terms of what people consider to be a deck that works well with that commander. So what do I mean by that? Well, I've noticed on there sometimes if you've got like a very, very large amount of decks that are put into EDHRec, and then you choose to create a standard deck, if you like, it goes through. If a lot of those decks are, based around very similar synergies, then you actually get an incredibly powerful and well-tuned deck. If, again, with a large card pool, the choice of themes is quite diverse, you know, say for instance there's within, like, I don't know, 1,000 decks, there's say 10% of each of those decks are based around a specific theme that may not have a good deal of overlap. That's a bit of an extreme example, but it sort of serves a focus really. Then you're going to get up this deck which has a sort of loads of different, like, groups of cards which synergize well with one another, and another group of cards which synergize with that particular theme, and another group that particular with another theme, but together they don't necessarily mesh. They might do, but they don't necessarily. Same with a smaller selection of decks. You know, if you're dealing with a very small selection, say, I don't know, 50 less decks, now maybe all of those decks are the same theme. Maybe that commander always tends to make you build the same sort of deck, and you're going to find your aggregate deck is probably spot on, and it synergizes very well. Conversely, if it's a commander with very, you know, a good deal of wiggle room in terms of the theme, you're going to find that you've got out of the 50 decks, quite a few of those, you know, groups of decks are going to be maybe similar, but between those groups there might not be that much similarity, and beyond what you might consider to be staples, there isn't much commonality, and again you end up with an interesting deck, but it has like a number of different themes in it. So what I thought it'd be interesting to do is feed, as I said, Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper through EDHRec and choose the cheap version, see what we get. This is what we've done in paper. This has been much more elegant when we come to do this all digitally. Okay, so we have Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper, no surprise there. And I've separated these all by colour and tried to group together similar themes. You'll see here actually one of the cool things about how this has turned out, and how, you know, a lot of these cards are going to be useful for providing fodder, if you like, for our deck beyond the actual beyond the grave, because we need to fill out some spots that are going to be obviously left here. These cards are very much on theme. You know, our theme is really about sacrificing. We're generating these tokens, so we want something that's going to synergize with the fact that we're sacrificing creatures all over the place. Either the creature itself does something when it's sacrificed, or it facilitates something else when another creature is sacrificed. And so going through here, I'm not going to read out all the cards here. So we've got Zubul Cutthroat, you know, fits into both of those categories. Smothering Abomination forces you to sack creatures, so it's a sack outlet, and it's got card draw on it. Pawn of Ulamog. When stuff basically hits the graveyard, you generate these tokens which you can then use to generate mana. Now, one of the things you have to be careful of here is, if you'll notice, and this is an important thing with this deck, it's fine with generating tokens, but obviously Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper, if we wanted to sack those tokens, in terms of triggering the ability on here, it says whenever another non-token creature you control is put into a graveyard from play. So if we're using some of these cards where they've got they're sack outlets, or they trigger when things are sacrificed, any type of creature, they may trigger, but Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper won't. Same with the Pawn of Ulamog. Actually, that only triggers when it's a non-token creature is put into the graveyard from the battlefield. So we've got another card here which is it's a sack outlet, so when it enters the battlefield you get to sack another creature. Flashback Marauders in here. Each player sacrifices a creature. So that's another good thing. You know, maybe we're looking for cards which force everybody to sack a creature, but we get a benefit out of doing that. Butcher Malakir. Another sack outlet. Bloodstoke Champion. So this is something else we're looking for in our choice of cards. In an ideal world, because we've got because this ability is very specific to non-token creatures, we do really want creatures that we've got some way of getting them back from the graveyard so we can sack them again. And you can see on Bloodstoke Champion, it's really useful. It's one to cast. It's a 2/1. It can't block, but has a raid 1 and a black, so you can actually return this from your graveyard to the battlefield. Only if you attack with a creature this turn, but it is a way of getting that back, and there's no anything extra on that. You don't have to sacrifice at end of turn, so you can keep sort of you redoing this to get this sort of graveyard recursion going on. Grim Higher Specs is in here. So when another non-token creature you control dies, draw a card. Carrion Feeder, sack a creature, put a +1/+1 counter. You see several of these cards have got also a +1/+1, which isn't part of Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper's original theme, but it's just a nice thing to be able to buff creatures up. You'll notice one thing that would be really useful if we've got a way of buffing the tokens, because these tokens are quite fragile. They're 3/1s, so that makes them fairly easy to kill. There's a lot of pseudo board wipers for tokens there that give everything -1/-1, that sort of thing. So we're definitely looking for cards as we develop this theme that are going to stop those tokens from being so fragile. Harvester of Souls. Whenever another non-creature dies, you may draw a card. So you'll notice that there's a ton of card draw as a result of sacking creatures. Another creature dies, you lose 1 life or gain 1 life. So what we're trying to do here is leverage the fact we've got stuff dying. Reassembling Skeletons. So this is very useful. This is one of these cards where we want to try and set this loop up. We've got stuff going in, we're getting it back out, and it's particularly useful when the card itself has that ability on it. So it's 1 and a black for a 1/1, but the good thing on this is you can return Reassembling Skeleton from your graveyard to the battlefield untapped. Voldaren Pariah. Pretty heavy sack cost on this. Sacrifice 3 other creatures and transform it. So with a lot of these cards, you're going to need we're going to need to play around with the balancing here, because we don't want to be in a position where we're actually just sacrificing everything and we don't really have a very strong board state. We're going to need to make sure that we've got a lot of cards which are going to trigger and do something with a positive net effect on the battlefield. There is a danger with Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper is it can turn into a very dirtly deck. That's probably not a problem in and of itself, but you just end up in this constant sack cycle where you're just sacrificing creatures, generating tokens, and you're not really doing anything. So that there is a danger of that with this deck if we don't sort of tune it so we get the balance right. Sifter of Skulls. It's difficult to see on here actually. Whenever another non-token creature dies, put a 1/1 colourless Eldrazi Sign creature token. So it's mana generation. Still in black here, we've got some utility cards. We've seen Shriekmaw in the toolkit, so there's no need for really that. We've got Bone Splinters in here. So this is a nice thing. Again, at the theme you're looking for here. What you want really to happen is, this is particularly actually useful if you've got maybe a destruction spell we can find that's been stapled onto a creature. With bone splinters, you know, we want to be sacrificing stuff, so we don't care that we sacked a creature in to destroy another creature. But from that perspective, it's a pretty cheap destruction spell. Single black, as long as we've got something in play we can sacrifice. Even better if it's actually not a non-token and we've got Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper in play, or another one of our sacrifice multipliers, if you like. So yeah, you can see why something like Bone Splinters made it into EDHRec's algorithm. Altars Reap, as an additional cost to cast Altars Reap, sacrifice a creature. You get to draw 2 spells off of that for 1 and a black. Got Dread Return. So now we're moving on to things that are going to get stuff back from the graveyard if they don't have any way of doing it themselves. So return target creature card from the graveyard to play. The interesting is the flashback cost has a sacrifice cost on it. Victimize, another way of getting back. So you're getting back 2 creatures, you're sacrificing another creature. You're choosing 2, sacrificing a creature, and then returning the chosen cards to the battlefield. Yep. Diabolic Tutor, we've got a single, the aggravation, the algorithm's picked up a single tutor from the card pool it looked at. We're moving on to red, Stalking Vengeance. So these are always interesting sack effects. So we've got a creature whereby when another creature you control dies, it deals damage equal to its power rather usefully. So if that happened to be a 3/1 token, then it's going to do 3 damage. Obviously, in order to trigger Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper's effect as well, we really want that to be happening to a non-token creature. Evoke cards are really interesting in this deck. So we've got Ingoture in here as a utility card for a way of dealing with artifacts, but if we cast it for its evoke cost, then it's actually going to get sacrificed. It's going to hit the graveyard, and with Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper in play, we get a token off of this. So, again, this sort of process, what's nice about it, if you're not familiar with Magic cards, you don't know a lot of the mechanics from different sets, you start to realise about, maybe I should look at the set that had Evoke in it, see if there's other on-colour cards which have useful utilities, where if I choose to basically cast them for the Evoke cost, they hit the graveyard. I've got Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper in play, or another sacrifice multiplier, then that's going to trigger. I've got Mog War Marshal, generates some tokens when it dies, as well as when it comes into the battlefield. What we're looking for here, although there's a Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper is generating tokens, what we're really looking for is not so much stuff that generates tokens when it comes into play, because the tokens in and of themselves are no good to Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper when they die. There are other cards in here which are, but not Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper. But when stuff generates tokens when it dies, so the case in Mog War Marshal, that conveniently happens. So if we sack this through some other mechanism, in actual fact, the thing about this is it has a self-sacrifice ability on it, because if you don't pay the echo cost, then that happens straight away. So they're very useful. Warstorm Surge, let's have a look into the battlefield on your control. It deals damage equal to its power to target. So this is what a good example of where it's just picked up a card where there's a useful utility. It doesn't really fit in with the Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper theme. Where you could, so what we know now is, okay, what if we had a card which we could put into play, probably a creature that had an ability on it that said something along these lines. So when it's put into the graveyard, then it deals damage equal to its power to target creature or player. Something to think about there. That, you know, with anything like this where you've got an enchantment in this particular type of deck, where you want stuff to die, well, that's one of the lines of the deck. Maybe looking for creatures which have an ability that triggers when they die. Ogre Battle Driver, when another creature enters the battlefield under your control, that creature gets +2/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. The Graveborn tokens already have haste on them, so it would only be useful for other tokens or other creatures where you didn't have haste. Again, says nothing about an interaction with the graveyard. Same with Hell Rider. So these are just the sort of certain utility cards in red that must have been included across multiple decks from EDHRec sample. Oh, here we go, green. Now this is another example of this thing where sort of looking at what it picks and seeing if there's other cards with the same mechanic. Young Wolf. And with Undying, you're going to get it back once with its tokens on it. You can do clever things. If you've got something in the deck that's going to remove tokens, you can set up this really cool recursion. But again, you've got to have both cards in play to do that. The Undying card and the counter removal. You need something that's going to remove counters. Now there is a counter sub theme in here, you'll see, which comes across from the original Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper. I think one of the cards, when it's sacrificed, generates these sort of +1/+1 counters. But the other thing, like I said, you want to do is, if you're looking to Undying and you're trying to maximize it, then you actually don't want counters on it. So again, something to think about. Emrakul's Evangel. So this has got sort of sack effect on it, and helps bring tokens into play. Veridian Emissary. It's another card when it enters the battlefield, when put into the graveyard. So this is mana ramp, or where you're searching for a basic land. Interesting line you can take with the Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper deck when it's producing these 3/1 tokens. Things like Garrick's Pack Leader. So whenever another creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Elemental Bond, similar effect. Draw a card. Although that's an enchantment, more useful to have it on a creature, because it does give you the opportunity to sack the creature if you needed to. Dawn Treader Elk has an inbuilt sack on it. Sek'Kuar Tribe Elder, that's already in the toolkit, I believe. Mitotic Slime. Another creates an interesting set of triggers. So when this is originally put into the graveyard, obviously with Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper in play, that will generate a 3/1 token. However, the subsequent tokens won't, but they will, by the ability on them, generate other tokens when they die. So there's some obviously interesting interactions with cards in this deck which don't differentiate between whether it's a token or whether it's a non-token. Moving on to the utility in green, we've got Acidic Slime, we've got Reclamation Sage, so these are all ways of destroying stuff. Card draw, Fecundity is interesting. Now this is a deck which we see in, it's been in a few commander decks I think so far, where green's been in there. So whenever a creature dies, that creature's controller may draw a card. In your deck, you're going to be, more creatures are going to be dying, so therefore you're going to end up drawing more cards. Obviously the opponents are going to get to draw cards off of this, as that their creatures are dying, but hopefully more of yours are dying. So Overworld Mysteries, another enchantment that cares about stuff dying. Evolutionary Leap, way of sacking a creature. And then finding a creature card. We've got Overrun in here, very useful. We've got green and we've got a creature based deck then to have some sort of overrun effect. Rishkar's Expertise, another utility card. Draw card equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. So with it generating 3/1 tokens, we're going to get to draw 3 cards. And also a way of casting anything 5 or less. I think a lot of the creatures in here are fairly small, so that it's again doesn't specifically play to the sacrifice theme of the deck, but obviously there's something going on there with the power. Second Harvest, we're generating tokens, so it makes sense to have an effect like this in the deck. Then we move on, we're in green, so we're going to see these sort of mana ramping type effects. We've got Rampant Growth, we've got Harrow, we've got card drawing green, which is Harmonize, we've got Shamanic Revelation, and then we move on to the multicolours in here. So we've got Hull Breach, so ways of getting rid of artifacts and enchantments. We've got Catacomb Sifter. It's got an ETB on it with this mana, generating these Eldrazi Scions, and also this other ability when a creature you control dies, so that can be any creature, be it a token or non-token, you get a scry effect. So it's sort of top deck manipulation, or top deck manipulation. No surprise to see Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper in here. Obviously cares about stuff being sacked. In fact, everything. Whenever a player sacrifices another permanent, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Now, of course, again, if you're playing this, you could argue that it really it's going to work against Undying, because you're starting to put tokens on stuff, so it's going to negate that. So there is a good reason for not putting Undying creatures in the deck if you do have a +1/+1 counter sub theme going on to buff those tokens. Golgari Germination, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 1/1 green sapling. Then we've got the charms, or a charm here, should I say Golgari Charm. Putrefies in here. Sprouting Thrinax, so we're moving on to the 3-colour stuff. When that dies, we get tokens. Deathbringer Thoctor, counter theme on this. We've got a Terminate in here. And then the artifacts and the colourless stuff. It's a Filigree Familiar that got selected. A Spawning Pit. So with Filigree Familiar, it's just got a when it dies effect on it. So there's an ETB and there's a when it dies a draw a card effect. Spawning Pit, it's a sack outlet, which allows you to put tokens into play based on the amount of counters you've got and based on the amount of creatures you've sacrificed. Then we have the signets, one of each of the relevant ones. And then again, we've got these, random is not really the right word, but these sort of utility cards which have been selected by the algorithm that don't really necessarily lock straight onto the sack effect. It's just at the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the number of tapped creatures you control. So I suppose the logic here is you're playing a token deck. It's a go wide strategy, or within there's a go wide strategy in that you're going to be generating lots of tokens, you're going to be attacking a lot. It's that sort of red zone interaction, so stuff's going to be tapped. So it's an indirect synergy, I suppose. Then we've got the mana base. So again, this is going to give us nice ideas for stuff that isn't already in our toolkit and isn't already coming across from our original commander fodder choice, the Beyond the Grave deck. These are already there anyway in the toolkit. Terramorphic Expanse, Evolving Wilds. Then we've got Bloodfell Caves, Jungle Hollow, and Rugged Highlands, which are all those, ETB Gain 1 Life lands. They come into play tapped. Fixed for 2 colours. It's also selected, probably because everybody was playing these in their decks, that was from the pool, the Guild Gates. It's only got one of the bounce lands from Ravnica. This one came from the Commander product. I found that when I looked at the actual Commander deck as well, there was only one in there. From the point of why it chose just the one, it might be a budget thing. I know some of these are slightly more expensive. There's also a utility land in here, which, no surprise, has a sack effect on it, which I think we've already seen Grim Backwaters before. And then we've got the Jund on colour relevant land stuff, so the Panorama and the Savage Lands. And then our mana base. Now the mana base is an interesting thing. I need to probably go back and review this if I was ever going to, actively use this deck. We are very low on mountains, but of course there's a lot of red fixing in our non-basic lands, so that might not be a problem. But certainly it's something where I would want to go through and recount all of the colours on the different cards and just see what's going on there, whether that works out correctly. So that, just to remind you, after we've been through a mountain of cards, is the deck that if you feed Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper through EDHRec, and remember this was done probably about a month ago, maybe, that's the aggregate deck you get. So definitely some stuff in there that we can pull across. And then just quickly looking at maybe relevant cards. I'm not going to go through the whole on-colour commander product that came out with Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper in the deck. It wasn't the main commander, it was an alternate commander. But again, it's worth seeing maybe what stuff comes up the same. I've pulled out a subset of cards. I've deliberately excluded all the general utility cards apart from mana fixing. So we've got Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper and things like... why did this end up in here? I'm trying to remember. Oh, because it's got a graveyard interaction, that's right. So either things that interact with the graveyard in some way or fix your mana. Spoils of Victory, Jund's Charm. That's got tokens, so that's why I included that. I'm just trying to remember on the fly why I left some of these around. Fecundity, we saw that. Primal Vigour. Cares about tokens. Goblin Sharpshooter. Whenever a creature dies, it untaps. There's an interaction going on there. Stronghold Assassin. Sack a creature, destroy a target non-black. How to Honoured Physician. Get stuff back from the graveyard. This is really interesting, and this is a card we want to look at, is Endless Cockroaches. When Endless Cockroaches dies, return it to its owner's hand. Deathbringer Thoctor, we saw that already. Stalking Vengeance, we'd seen that one. Fell Shepherd was put into here. Way of getting stuff back from the graveyard. Charnel Horde Worm was in the toolkit. Quagmire Druid. Security Tribe Elder. Elvish Skyseeker wasn't, so sacrificing a creature. Viscera Seer was in the toolkit. I'm trying to remember whether Gigalgary Guildmage was in here. Certainly it's got a sack effect on there. Another card with a sack effect. Interesting enough, this is in here, and this was in the original Beyond the Grave deck, the Deep Fire Elemental. Way of dealing with artifacts and creatures. Jar of Eyeballs. Spine of Ishar, that's removal. Tooth and Claw. Puts 3/1 red creature token named Carnivore into the battlefield. Goblin Bombardment. Another sack outlet. You've got these enchantments that like stuff to be sacrificed, like Furnace Celebration, Blood Rites, we've got Reincarnation in here, so a way of getting stuff back from the graveyard. Then we've got our obelisks, our armory sphere. There's a soul ring from the thing, from the original Commander product, Carnage Altar, and the Swiftfoot boots. And the land base, again, stuff you've probably seen already. These Evolving Wilds. We've got Temple of the False God was put in the Commander product. Command Tower, Opal Palace, a Rupture Spire, Vivid Grove. So there's all sort of stuff here that's going to help fix for the mana. These we've seen before. Then the Guild Gates. You can see theme here, the refuges. So you can see that Guild Gates and refuges are very cheap budget choices. And then we've got the Grim Backwards, the utility card here. So again, stuff to think about, avenues to take. So that's all I really want to talk about in this episode. We were looking at what sort of stuff comes up when we do aggregate builds from specifically EDHRec. What stuff comes up if we start looking at Commander product for like the on-color product and getting ideas from there. So that sets us up nicely for next week. We're going to actually be looking at the Commander fodder material that's coming across from our deck Beyond the Grave, and then we can sort of substitute out at that point cards from here. Where we can't, we're going to leave those cards in as a placeholder, and then generally start thinking about fleshing out all our vacant slots as well we've got in there. So that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.